Welcome to the Foster Friendly Podcast, where we come together to make a difference in the lives of children in foster care and the families who care for them. Foster Friendly communities are part of a nationwide movement by America's Kids Belong that helps people from all walks of life take action and help kids and families thrive. You'll hear from former foster youth, foster and adoptive parents, social workers, faith and business leaders, and other experts on how to engage in meaningful ways. Our hosts Brian, Travis, and Courtney explore inspiring stories of everyday people making a difference in foster care where they live and work.
Welcome to another episode of the Foster Friendly Podcast. Today we are talking to a couple from Georgia who became an instant family of 6 in 2020. They said yes to a sibling group of 4 who they adopted from foster care, and their lives would be changed forever. And their sleeping patterns, I'm sure, too. We'll hear more of their story and talk more in depth about the issue of siblings in foster care today. Jamie and Adriana Howard have been together since 2005. They were high school sweethearts who live just north of Atlanta and have their 4 kids and 2 dogs. They were youth pastors for almost 10 years before jumping into parenting via foster care and then adoption. And then after 2 years of fostering, they adopted their 4 kids in July of 2022 and are learning every day what it means for the 6 of them to be a family. Jamie is the COO. Do you say COO, COO? Am I doing that? How do you say that?
It's COO.
Yeah. COO, okay. Thought so. Slingshot, a swag management company. Adriana is the community engagement manager for Georgia Kids Belong, so is one of our colleagues. Welcome to the podcast, guys. Great to have you.
Yeah, thanks so much, man.
Yeah, so just tell us a little about your adoption journey. Take us into that story, set the stage for us. You know, had you been considering adoption for a long time, or how did that come about?
So yes and no. I would say as far as adoption goes, I mean, as far as our preliminary dating conversations, adoption was a part of our plans. But it did not happen in the way that we anticipated, as these things often do. And so, now that we get, hindsight's always 20/20, we look back on it now, we're like, it was exactly what it needed to be in the time that it needed to happen, with the kids it needed to happen with. And also it was nothing like we had anticipated. And so, we initially set out, we were youth pastors for 10 years and we were kind of young when we were doing that. And so we felt like our parenting cup was kind of full. We had our kids and we were really heavily involved with them. And so when it got to the point that we were feeling like, okay, I think it's time for us to actually be legitimate legal parents, instead of just sort of step-in parents like we kind of felt like we were, for a lot of years, which was wonderful. We love our kids, our former, youth group, so close with a lot of them. We found out pretty quickly that we couldn't have children biologically, and it kind of was like, okay, cool, actually, that we mourned that, and it was a bummer, but we also were we've been talking about adoption literally since the first time we started dating. So let's just that door's shut, our door's open, let's just go. And so it took a while to kind of fall into where we are now. We initially started off thinking domestic infant. It seems I guess you're supposed to start with a baby. That's the natural course of things. I guess we'll do that. And then once we were all done with that whole process, we just kind of felt like we were being tugged in a different direction. Not we're not baby people, but we just kind of felt like we were being pulled towards something else. And so we started our whole home study process over again and jumped right back into foster care licensing instead. And we're interested in siblings and older kids. So again, it's a yes and also kind of no. We always felt like adoption was going to be part of our story, but we didn't know it was going to look like how it wound up turning out.
Wow. So what were some early thoughts when you started to see okay, this isn't what we thought? And there's a line, someone says life is always at some turning point. You're clearly at a turning point. Just what were some of those early rumblings of, okay, we're still on track, but there's something?
One of the big turning points for us was, like Adriana said, we started with the domestic infant adoption and didn't really know a lot about adoption, the ins and outs of it. You see so much in movies and things like that, you really don't get a great picture of what the reality is. We always laugh when you see a TV show where they're like, let's go get a baby. And 24 hours later, they're like, "Oh my gosh, we're meeting our child for the first time." Just nonsense like that. And
Right.
and so we were on the list to, we had to go through all these trainings and stuff just to be on a list to be available as a home for a domestic infant. And we got an update from the adoption agency saying, "Yeah, here's how many children we placed, and here's how many families are waiting." And it was kind of this like, "Oh, there's like tons and tons and tons of families waiting for a baby." And Adriana wrote me, we kind of had this moment where we're like, do we continue down this path, or do we go to a different agency, or what? And so Adriana wrote me this letter just to put her thoughts down, and just said, I feel like we had some other kind of markers in our journey that made us feel very drawn to kids from really hard places and stuff like that. We had done work with kids from New York City, privileged kids and stuff like that. And she said, I feel like it just looks more like Jesus for us to maybe consider doing foster adoption, because you have all these families who are waiting for a baby, where in the foster care system you have all these kids who are waiting for a family. And it's the complete opposite. And so I read that letter and I said, you know what, that sounds like wisdom to me. And the very next day we canceled our adoption. We, let them just keep the money, because you're like, okay, well, I guess that's a donation to the cause. And then we just immediately switched, called defects, and got, started moving down that pathway. It was definitely a turning point where we, you don't know what you're really getting into. Still don't think we really know what we're getting into, but you go on that path and you just kind of walk through the doors that open up to you. And that was a really defining moment. We said, oh, this is what our family should feel like. And it immediately felt like peace. We didn't obviously know what we were getting into and all the ins and outs. And telling, defects, we would take 1 to 4 kids, which, little tip out there, if you say that, it will give you 4 children. So we immediately signed up and started moving forward. It wasn't much longer that we did that. But that was definitely a turning point for us, yeah.
I love it. It's definitely, I don't know what it's like in Georgia, but here they're often not even licensing families that will just say we're only open to babies or birth to age 5, because the need is much greater for sibling groups or older kids. So I'm curious, I don't even know what age were your kids and what age are they now?
So when we our kids were our only match. I'll correct it. We didn't say 1 to 4. We said 2 to 4.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Because we weren't interested in just one. And get it right. And
Get it right.
so, which is very similar. I can't recall how things were 5 years ago when we started, but currently, I mean, they're not recruiting for families that are really only interested in babies for obvious reasons. And so when we first met our kids, they were our very first match. They were 5, 6, 7, and 8. We met them on Zoom. Everybody was in lockdown.
Yeah, it was still the middle of 2020.
Just started like a couple of months prior, and so we did all of our initial meetings with them via Zoom, which was just like a hot mess. But we also we were able to record all those, so it is kind of a bizarre context. Yeah. But we still have all those recordings of the very first time we met our kids, which is a weird thing to be able to have. It's really beautiful. But they were 5, 6, 7, and 8, and now we're about to have birthdays in the next 2 weeks, so we will have a 9, 10, 11, and 12.
Wow.
So.
I love to, it's often you hear in stories how, some catalyst of whatever the inspiration is that gets you into the journey, something changes maybe on the journey. But so I love what you said, Jamie, too, of how that did pivot and change, and really that beautiful sort of convicting thought of, who's actually waiting, and maybe let's reorient around the needs of the kids waiting. I know that was a early kind of mantra for America's Kids, with Brian Mavis as the co-founder of let's change who waits. So I love that line from that. So
well, it's just very cool too. Like I said, we look back on it now and we can see with perfect clarity how everything fell into line the way that it was supposed to. And not to say everything's been wonderful, but it certainly has been intentional. And our background, without knowing it, our background was really creating us to be the kind of people who could meet the needs of our kids, And so it really is just like wonderful to see that like no pain was wasted, no hard days went without, kind of being vindicated. We both came from really broken homes in ways that we have a lot of similarities to our kids' stories, and they're young. They don't even understand kind of all the nuances of that just yet. But it's really cool to be able to have our own backgrounds be something that can function as almost a mirror of sorts with our kids. Like we can empathize beyond just like, I read a book that said trauma's hard. I'm so sorry that it happened to you. It's like we get those things too. And even like with our youth ministry experience, our kids were all, we had a lot of kids that came from really hard places too. So it was just kind of like we were those kids and we worked with those kids and then now we're living with those kids. And so there's like this really awesome hard through line that's been consistent. And so it's like, I don't know if the plan had been for us to like have biological children, sure, we would have risen to the occasion, but it's like we were kind of meant for the kids that we have, and in some ways it feels like we would have been wasted on kids that like had never known our thing,
Oh, that's really good. The other thing it makes me think of too is that when people think, you make a really good point too, that I think a lot of us think at times, I don't have what it takes. I don't have, and we're going to get more into that. You'll talk more about that. But that sense too of what you're saying is so much of the background of our lives, and maybe it's even our own childhoods that do empower us and grow us in ways maybe we don't realize how helpful that is about to be. Not like you guys are just saying, well, we didn't currently have biological kids prior. You're looking and going, we came from broken homes, but we also worked with kids from hard places as youth pastors and like seeing the preparatory ground that was as well. So I just love that you're kind of also, highlighting that part.
Yeah, there's a real specific moment where we had just signed up and it was before we knew about our kids or whatever. And it was funny because as we went around and once we did find out about our kids, told our friends and family and stuff, everyone was very like sweet about it. Like, oh my gosh, that's so exciting. And you're just like, we had one friend who goes, what? 4 kids?
Why?
And why are you doing that? We laughed so hard because we're like, thank you for speaking, honestly to this very thing that we're jumping into. And we did, I do appreciate that we had sort of like a holy naivete about the whole thing because you don't really know what you're getting into. And I think if we were able to see all the hardships that have happened since we brought our kids in, there may have been, a discouragement to ever jump in. But that's the cool thing about it is that like every day, it's like the our daily bread is provided, and every single day, just this week our kids are waking up at 2:00 in the morning, keeping us up all night long because of possible issues that we don't know about with like sleep at night because of some kind of trauma thing or whatever, and you're exhausted and you're frustrated and you're tired and you're going through all that kind of stuff, and then you go to sleep and you wake up the next day and you're like, hey, let's just do it all over again because that's what being a parent is, right? And like that's the beautiful thing about it is I have met people who have been interested in foster care and have said things like, I don't know if I have what it takes, or I don't know if I can do that or whatever. And like, there's probably some truth that none of us really have what it takes, right? And that's probably true of any parent, like biological or otherwise. And there's the other part of it, like that if you can be the person who shows up every day and like puts in the work and like just says, hey, I don't have to have every little piece figured out. We certainly didn't have every piece figured out. We still don't have every piece figured out. And but there's just showing up and being there for your kids and kids who need it. And, we had this moment before we got kids where we said, at least we know, because we had worked with students from the age of like 12 to the point now, many of them actually have kids of their own, where we would say we know what it's like to put in the long haul effort with these kids, and a lot of them were these meanest snakes. Teenagers who ended up, breaking our hearts and then making our hearts, and we love them to death, and we still mentor them and have so much fun with them now. And we learned that, like, you grow over the long term. Like, you put in the work, and eventually you see fruit from. It's not going to just, be void, so to speak. So the fruit will be there eventually.
Yeah, along those lines, Adriana, you once said something really powerful in another interview. regarding the common fear of people feeling capable, just as you were just talking about, Jamie. And what you said, Adriana, was you learn as much as you can. You learn on the way. You don't give up. You don't give up. You don't give up. If you're tenacious about it, you will become people that can handle it. That's your story. Your story. We become people who could parent our kids. We did not start that way. So can you speak more into what Jamie was just talking about?
Yeah, I mean, we can't emphasize that enough. It is a process, and this is not to like cast aspersions at all, non-judgmental to the nth degree of any other parents that we know. But I can speak for us and say that like we're 4 years in and we still are like very open with saying like we don't know what we're doing. You know, like we kind of know some days and other days we're like, why are any of us here? Like it's still very confusing sometimes. And so we are still constantly, he can attest to that. We're constantly like, let's try this thing out. Let's try this new thing. I read about this thing. Let's try to implement it. Let's like that thing that we tried didn't, you know, so we're constantly trying to pivot and evolve and experiment and like, you know, I read about this thing. I heard about this thing. I think it could be whatever. Like we're constantly trying to figure out what works. And so we're just open, like as open as like a person can be to just like, I want to be better. I want to know more. I want to be more strategic. I want to like just not give any place for like my own ignorance or like my own like, I don't know, like bitterness to like creep in and keep me from being somebody who like wants to show up every day. That does not mean that there are days where we don't show up. Like there are certainly days where it's just like, you know, like you're human. Yeah, you're spent and like your humanity takes over. But like, goodness gracious, like we see so clearly. I think probably because we've had this like ministry experience where we were like we were very heavily involved in our kids, but we weren't their parents, so we had the benefit of like the day is done, now we get to go home, but we could watch from afar and see like, you know, what the effects are for kids when their adults don't show up consistently. And so we just, I don't know, it's like we're looking like 10 years down the road, you know, like we're constantly feeling that way. Like we feel very heavily like the weight of like our day to day, not because of like the day to day, but because of like 10 years down the road. Like I'm seeing down the road. And so that just really keeps us in this mindset of like, if we haven't figured it out yet, that is okay. We'll figure it out today. And if by the evening we're like, we still haven't figured it out, we're going to start again tomorrow. And it's just like, for our kids, our youngest recently, she said to me, she said, wow, mommy, you guys give us a lot of lessons. A lot of life lessons.
A lot of lessons.
Number one, I'm so sorry. Number two, you are so welcome. And so they like poke fun at us. So we're always like, all right, new plan, new strategies. They're like, oh my gosh. But you see like how we've already been reaping the benefits of that. Like our kids are, you know, they have their hangups like any human would who's gone through the kind of things they have gone through, but holy moly, are they like so content and in so many ways so well adjusted, and they're so like present, and they're so I don't know, like they're just like wired differently, and I think they're just like down for the ride because that's kind of like our family's thing. It's like we don't have to figure it out. They know we don't because we're super honest with them. Like we're just trying to figure it out too. So like they're figuring it out, we're figuring it out, and so they're very much down for just like, all right, we're trying something new. Bang, let's just do it. Like so it's just very much we're learning as we go.
I love that. I feel like I have to become an expert in so many different areas as a foster and adoptive mom. But also I find that sometimes you just need to get to know your kids, right? We don't need to read all these books to do this. They're helpful, but it's just being a detective and getting to know what does this kid need in this situation. But, you know, there still are some good books or resources. What do you guys find as far as, is there a book that you guys have really enjoyed as an adoptive couple, or a support group, or how do you guys find that support and that encouragement and the education?
Yeah. So I'm sure most people are familiar in this space at all with TBRI and that sort of thing. And that was a great foundation for us to give us scripts. I think one of the things I think was so powerful about having to go through foster care training and things like that people who just have biological children would not understand, is how helpful it is to have like a framework that you work from. You don't have to stick in that same framework, but you start in a place. And it works honestly when we deal with other kids who are not from foster care background. We're just like, oh, we've learned how to address physiological needs in a way because it's survival over here, because our kids are far less resilient than maybe someone else. But it's still helpful with every kid. So I think finding a framework, whether that's like the whole brain child, like learning handles of like flip your lid, or talking about TBRI and having those scripts of like who's the boss, and you asking me, you telling me, like those sort of things. And I think there's some really basic frameworks that are super helpful that you can start from. And like you said, that you have to learn your kids, and I think something that I did not understand coming into this was how different 4 siblings could be. And you think you would know that intuitively, because I have siblings, we're very different, but it's just like, I think I'm a programmer by trade, and I think like, okay, here's the program that I will implement with my kids. And you're like, that doesn't work. All 4 kids. Yeah, exactly. Like, I can do this thing. But they are 4 totally different kids who do have to, be dealt with differently. And Adriana's done a great job of like finding Facebook groups about, ADD, or about this particular diagnosis that one of our other kids has, or about parentification, and like asking questions and talking to other people, and really, trying to figure out the individual child. And another thing is too, that again, not intuitive coming into this, is that we did not have our children when they were babies. And so we didn't get to go through preschool with them. We didn't, youngest was in kindergarten when she started. We didn't know how to be like school parents. And so we were like, things like engage with your teachers. So we would just ask the teachers, like, please let us know, are we asking enough questions? Are we not asking enough questions? Adriana went to the doctor and was like, hey, all of our kids are sick all the time. Is that normal? She's like, yeah, 4 kids. One's going to be sick, basically with all moments of everything. She's okay, cool. And just like playing, not being afraid to be kind of seen as stupid or something, and just ask lots of questions, because you're like, we don't know. Like, we haven't had to go through all the same like little life checkpoints. And so we don't know about like, should we raise the flag about this? Should we not? And so, I don't know if there's an exact, there's lots of good books out there, like I said, but I think in terms of just like looking for resources, the big thing is asking questions of the, like, build your little community, your little village. And then there's a lot of like, is this a normal little boy thing? Is this a kid from a hard place thing? Is this a, sibling thing? Which we've asked the teachers, like, hey, our son's getting in trouble at school. Is this like normal for his class or whatever? She's like, this part's normal, that part's not normal. Let's work with that. Really just lean into the people who are the experts. Yeah.
Well, back to the whole thing around siblings and how they're different and stuff. I think talking before to you one time, Jamie, you had this hilarious line. I don't know if you remember this, about like when you went to the library, and if you do the math, do you remember that? Yeah. Can you say that again?
Yeah. So, it's funny because if you have one kid, they can't fight with themselves. But 2 kids can only fight with each other. 3 kids, kid 1 can fight with kid 2, kid 2 can fight with kid 3, and kid 3 can fight with kid 1. But the math on 4 children is you've now jumped to 6 possible fights. And so this exponentially grows from there.
Exponentially fights.
It's like the math just is coming out. And so it's like, we'll laugh, because I'll do little daddy dog with the girls, and then take the so on and went and bought hummus together. But I'll take one of them out at a time. We have a big phrase here. I think I heard it from Stanley originally, which was, do for one what you wish you could do for all. And when we have 4 kids, it's not fair. It's not, I tell the kids that all the time. It's not fair that I took Harper out to go get ice cream after whatever, because it would be great if I could do that for all. I can't do that for all. And so one part of it is just, if I take 4 kids to the library, it's a field trip, and you're managing a crowd. If I take 1, it's like, oh my gosh, this is so fun. We can just languish and sit in the aisle and read books together and all that kind of stuff. And so there's back and forth benefit and, cost kind of thing with sibling groups. But that was a huge thing for us, kind of bringing back to a real lesson, was our youngest two came with lots of very tough behavioral issues. And we were having tantrums probably 6 to 8 hours a day, nonstop tantrums. Adriana would, be like, I got to take a break. I'm like filling in here, and I'm like, I'm crashing over here. And, we're just like going from room to room, managing and having to restrain at times and get it, put them in a little sweet hug and hold them because they're just going violent, breaking stuff and hitting people and stuff like that. And you're exhausted, you're not sleeping, all that kind of stuff. And what we learned really quickly was our older two girls didn't have those same issues. And so we would start letting them stay up later so that when the younger two finally went to sleep and the days and wars were over, we could say, let's watch a movie together. Let's just get some dessert. And we still weren't, we've been fighting tantrums, trying to keep the peace and say, you're exhausted, you're not in the best place, but they cherish those moments. Just finding some way to
even it out, because they haven't done as much of us as the other two, just by default.
Yeah.
Well, what I love too is I think there's something that I really want to hear you back to you, Jamie, on, because you've talked about this before, and I think it's really worth honing back in on. This was from another conversation, but when we talk about the topic of siblings in foster care, and Courtney's going to share a staggering statistics here at the end after this, but that there's a importance in the sibling bond that I think can be underestimated or not seen, that, they were a pre-existing family unit.
Yeah.
And so, there's something intentional here about not just preserving, we want to have more foster and adoptive families, preserve those sibling connections to stay together. But what about just what you guys saw in the transition time, and even I'm sure today, but that unit, that connectedness that they had eased the transition into your home as a new family? I mean, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. So as just a basic statement, sibling groups, it's super important. And a good way that it's put is our kids moved from home to home. So they were, I think, in 4 homes over the course of a few years. And some of those were long-term placements. Some of those were short, respite moments for, trips and things like that. They had moved from different houses. And so when they moved in with us, even though we told them, where are your parents, basically, and made it clear, they were like, okay, but we're going to be with y'all for a little while, and then we'll go to our next house. And they just didn't have an understanding of what permanency meant. What they did have was this sibling bond that went with them from house to house to house. And that's so incredibly important for a lot of different reasons. One is just their identity, knowing who they are. It's really funny. We'll catch them telling stories that some of them were I think there's a hint of truth there, but some of them I feel like we call it the lore. We'll be driving in the front of the van and they just share stories yeah, I remember you were in diapers and you did this thing. And it's I don't know if that's a real story or just something that, but it's their story. And we call it the lore. Okay, there's
the lore.
You had this toy. I remember that toy. He gave me this or whatever. And we because that's their identity. That's their story. And so we let them write stories about it. We let them write letters to their biological parents. At Father's Day, Mother's Day, kind of things. Give them opportunities to share at Christmas. We try to help that continuancy of their identity. But as far as them being siblings, there's such an important part of that. Sharing that story and not feeling like they're just out there, floating in nowhere. And so part of the transition was so helpful because our oldest was very parentified because she was the parent from all those houses. And part of it, we've tried to honestly unravel that a lot with her so that she can be a kid again. And so that's still a journey that goes on today that we have to kind of work through that. But what was really helpful about that, as a kind of a survival mechanism for them, was when they first moved in, we can say things like, hey, can you go help your sister take care of this? Because this one's throwing this huge tantrum. And can you help with this? And can you go, sit with them and check on them, and really like helping them work together in that. And also, when they go through really tough things at school or go through tough things at get in trouble here at the house or whatever, where they could comfort each other and be there with each other. And I think that's like such a powerful, powerful thing that, again, is not intuitive going into this. You just think, oh, more kids. But you forget that there's this whole benefit of kids who are in the same boat with each other, who have gone through the same things as each other, who, our kids got made fun of at school for being adopted, or being in foster care. And one of the other ones, like, I'm going to fight that kid, like being right there with him. But the other one's like, I know what that's like, and being able to sit there and like, cry with them too. And so, yeah, it's a thing that, again, if you just think about, oh, there's a lot of kids, or 3 kids, or 4 kids, or 10 kids, whatever it is, that's daunting. But you forget that there's a whole psychological and emotional benefit of having kids who have someone in their corner, that they're not just like having to click restart every time that they move from home to home.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, our family, we've adopted 6 kids, and there we have 2 sibling groups, but we also have our oldest daughter, who's now 21. She was adopted at 15 and separated from her siblings. They were adopted into a different home, and then her in our home. And just the impact that had on her and continues to have on her, by far, she'll say that was the hardest hurt of her foster care journey, her adoption journey. It was being separated from her siblings. Yeah. And reports say that 2/3 of kids in foster care have siblings, and 50% of those are separated from each other. Some of them never reunited. It's just super staggering and very heartbreaking. So what would you guys say to people that are considering fostering or adopting, and what would your encouragement be to take on siblings?
Man, I mean, it is like a grab bag of like, there's pluses and minuses, like, in that I say minuses, not like don't do it, but like hard. It's hard, obviously, like you're saying, like you're talking about exponential growth here. So like everything is just by numbers more difficult. But gosh, like I think about our kid, like you're talking about, 2/3 of sibling sets are separated. Our kids have other siblings that were older than them that were also in care and were separated for, for different reasons. And it like breaks my heart that like our kids only knew them by like nicknames. Like they don't even know their siblings' actual name. We don't have that information either. So it's like just like the levels of loss just like continue to reverberate, and we just can't catch all those pieces enough to like deal with the hurt, and so like my encouragement would just be like, I don't know, like we stepped into this so naive about our own capacity and what it was gonna like how our bodies and lives would feel from those shockwaves of the kids, but like in all so many beautiful, amazing ways, they have just like turned our whole lives upside down. And I don't even like, we don't even remember who we were before. Yeah. It's just like, we're, July will be 2 years since adoption, which means 4 years since they moved in. And I'm like, it's only been 4 years. Like, I don't even, it's like AD kind of thing. Like, I don't even know. Like, it feels like everything just started then. And I just I can't speak highly enough of like our experience in this just thing that we've been doing. Again, not to say it hasn't been absent of like really hard days. Mm-hmm. Again, we both came from really broken backgrounds. We are well acquainted with like hard things. This is the hardest thing we've ever done. By far. It makes everything else look like Candyland. But we wouldn't trade any of it because our kids are just otherworldly in their capacity for like good. They are just like, it's like they were deposited here from like another planet. They really are like, they're different. They're wired differently. Their capacity for like empathy and kindness and wit and like resilience is beyond us, and we would just, we would be so, I don't know, we would have missed out on like the coolest thing ever, if we hadn't stepped into this. And I'm glad that we didn't know what we were stepping into. because we might have said no, but that was my encouragement. Is like the yes, it is daunting as anything, but like the possibility for like what comes afterwards is just so breathtaking that I don't know, man. We couldn't have made cooler kids. Like we really couldn't have, you know. We just couldn't have made cooler kids.
Yeah, it's so powerful, and I agree. I think when anyone asks about foster care or anything like adoption, and we can speak to it in any way, I always remind them that I want you to know that it's crazy hard, not to discourage you, but to prepare you that it's not rosy and romantic and all this. Like it's not like going to get a puppy from the that's not what it is. But Father's Day was a couple days ago. Adriana, the kids prepare these little pictures and letters and stuff for me. And I'm just weeping like a little wimp over there. They're like, I made Daddy cry. I made Daddy cry. I'm just because she prepared these pictures of when they had first moved in versus how big they are now and stuff like that 4 years later. And we have just now gotten to the point where we can even revisit some of those pictures and those videos and things from when they first moved in because it was so hard. And it's just, I'm like overwhelmed with how good the whole thing has been. And so it's like, yes, it's hard. Yes, it's tough. Yes, it's gonna be a trying thing. And there's many trying days ahead of us. But to echo what she's saying is like it's absolutely worth it. It is absolutely like our hearts are so full. And oh my gosh, like I could not be more proud of our kids and how far they've come. And those tantrums and everything, they still have little hits. They still have moments. They still have struggles. But oh my gosh, these kids have like blossomed. They were so far behind in school, so far behind. They didn't have to take care of themselves hygienically and things like that. And they have just turned into these beautiful little kids who are like brilliant and have done so well in school and everything like that, and have shown up for each other in big ways and stuff like that. So it's absolutely worth it, despite all that. Yeah, so.
It's cool too because they're so. We would not have our feelings hurt if our kids weren't like grateful. I think that's like a kind of a miss. What's the word I'm looking for? That'd be a misunderstanding. Sure. If we stepped into this and just thought they would come in just like, thank you, Mommy and Daddy, for this.
Right.
That's just And we would never begrudge our kids, and we don't. Like the days that they're just like not thankful, we're like, yeah, I'm not thankful for the things we went through either, like 100%, But we are really big in our house about like big time communication, like whatever you're feeling, whatever you're thinking, like please share it. We share our, obviously we use discretion, but like we try to be as forthcoming as we can with the kids as well, because we want them to know like we are experts in some things. We are not experts in parenting, and that should not give you like, I don't want you to be afraid, but we just want you to know like we're figuring it out too. So you guys are figuring out how to belong to a family. We're also figuring out how to belong to a family. And so just like give us grace as well. But because I think we're so open with our kids and they're so open with us, there is like this real like sense of thankfulness that they have. And in his Father's Day, I had the kids all wrote Father's Day letters. And, several of them said, and they've echoed these kinds of sentiments through the years, like, thank you so much for adopting all four of us. Like, we could have been split. We could have been lost to each other. Our 10-year-old.
Yeah, they always say, thank you for adopting me and my siblings. That's how they write it.
Wow.
And they are acutely aware of the fact that that is not a given.
Yeah.
And they are just so thankful for things like that, and still like, we're 4 years into this, and like our kids will still ask sometimes, like, "Are we going to have dinner tonight?" Because they still have those kind of lingering, food insecurities or things like that. And I have to remind them, like, listen, like we have made sure that you have food on the table every single meal since you moved in, and we're never going to make sure, like, you will never ever go without. But there's also never a day ever that we put food in front of you. They're not like, "Thank you so much for this food that you made." Like they're just grateful. They don't have to be. They don't owe us jack, but like. They're so aware of their circumstance, and they have nothing but just like gratitude for where they are. And like, they like, again, I don't want to keep emphasizing it, but like, they just are wired differently. and they know where they came from, and they can spot like the beauty in where they came from as well. You know, we do our best to honor what was good. Like we really want to hold to that. And again, some of that is kind of made up. Like they've created places to be thankful, look back on and be like, oh, that was so nice. And we're like, I don't think that was real. But yes, that was so wonderful. I love that story that you tell.
Yeah.
But they also are intuitive enough to like look back and see like, gosh, some of that really sucked. And like can compare it to now. And again, they don't owe us their gratitude, but they are so thankful. And there's just like never an opportunity. Like, I mean, like on the daily, like, thank you so much for paying for me to go to camp. Thank you so much for like the breakfast that you made this morning. Thank you so much for, I know my birthday's coming up. Thank you so much for the presents that I know you're going to, like, they just are so thankful, you know, for like everything. And it is not lost on me when we're interacting with other families who have biological children. It's like that is not innate in those kids because they've never gone without. So they don't always know to be thankful for like little things. And not that I'm sitting around like I put a plate in front of you. Where's my thank you? Like I don't care, you know. But they hear us always being thankful to each other. Thank you for giving me a glass of water. Thank you for whatever. And so they just like echo that, and they're just, you know, I mean, they recognize, like they can see the work that we're putting into it, and it's not lost on them. And they are little, like I mean, they're not babies, but like 9, 10, 11, 12, they're still babies, you know, in so many ways. But they are like so. They've had to become wise in the world just because of their situations. They've had to grow up really fast, and they just like, you know, they're just thankful.
And yeah, I know you guys don't do this to the praise and the accolades, but we do thank you for saying yes to 4 siblings and keeping them together because it's not common and it is such a need. Like I said, there are hundreds of kids across the nation that are waiting to be adopted, and many of them with siblings. So yeah, we encourage other people to consider this and hear your story and see that they can do it, right? They can do it. It does take time. It takes a lot of energy, but people can do it. But also it takes people to support you, you know, thinking about fostering, adopting, and then bringing in a sibling group. What encouragement would you give, or what could you call other people to take action in supporting families so that they can bring in a sibling group? Like, what has that look like for you so that you could do that the day to day or even at the very beginning? How can people support families bringing in foster kids, especially a group of them?
Admittedly, that is something that I think we have struggled with. And feel free to correct me, but we are not the kinds to ask for help. That's just like not something that we excel at. And so we still like in such a sweet way, we still have family that are like, you are allowed to ask for help and you are allowed to say yes when I offer it, and like stop rejecting our help, you know? So that's something that like even 4 years into it, we're still learning. My mom had one of our girls all day yesterday, and I was fighting to like, is it okay? I can come get her whenever you need. Like it's a problem. I'm just like, it's probably so much. I should probably, you know. And she's like, it's fine. Like you need to stop. And so that is something that we struggled with. And so I guess my answer to that would be learn really quickly how to not be that. I feel like we're just now kind of getting in a groove where we're figuring out how, and it's not like a pride. I mean, maybe I don't think it is. It's just like a survival thing. We hunkered down with them hard. Like they moved in into quarantines. Like none of us were getting out. We were all locked in with each other. Like we were just stick suckers in a space, just trying to like survive. And I feel like we didn't come out of that. Like we're still kind of in like hunkered down survival mode. And so that is not to our benefit. It's not to our kids' benefit. It does not reflect well of like kind of what the community at large is capable of. And so I would say like figure out how to be, we need help kind of people, because people want to help. They want to help. People want to support. So learn how to ask for it. Learn how to accept it.
One of the big things that we have done is that we're really connected with our church, and we have a small group of other couples that we meet with, you know, every week, and from emotional, spiritual, kind of like reaching out to them, saying, "Hey, this is a really hard week." That has been a huge help of like having people that we can go to pray for us. And on the hard days, people that love you so much that they don't pretend like everything's fine, and they'll cry with you, be mad with you. And like when our, kids have gone through really tough things at school, they can be mad with us and be like, "That's not okay." And we're like, "Yes, thank you." And I think that's so, people who are maybe don't have a community, I think that would be something that you really want to look into, because even if we haven't been the best at like asking for physical help in terms of like, babysitters and things like that, that has been a huge help for us. And honestly, like when their kids first moved in with us, we put them in Taekwondo across the street. And the people that were running that little school, it was in the middle of COVID. They had no students besides our kids. And they have even been like huge supporters of the kids, and have like been right there alongside them through the entire adoption journey and foster care journey, and have been tough with them in ways that like has been really powerful for the kids to like have other adults in their lives, and of course like teachers and things like that. And I think again, be generous with asking for help, and looking for people who can, other adults in your life who can be there for your kids, like it takes a village kind of thing. There's nothing novel about that, but it is something that's easy to, depending on your own psychology and struggles, it might be easy to kind of climb up and be like, I got to figure all this out, instead of saying like, hey, we need help. And like we really use at least, if not physical things, maybe but just like prayer and encouragement, keeping conversations going, just to be able to have people that you can vent to. I actually have another father who I meet with every Wednesday at 5:30 in the morning. It's the only time we can meet. And every time that I struggle with my anger or lost my temper on my kids or something like that, I confess that to him, and I say, pray for me, and he does the same for me. And just every struggle that we've had, or Adriana and I are not in sync because of something that's going on in our marriage or with the kids or whatever, confessing those things to him. And so I think that there's a huge power in just the relational, finding people that you can have emotional, relational or spiritual connection with. So.
And I think that's so common for foster and adoptive families to feel, not like you said, it's not a pride thing, but we're in that survival mode, and it's hard for them to ask for help or to even think I need help right now. So again, I charge other people that are listening, if you're not a foster adoptive family, but you know one, don't wait for them to ask for help. Go to them and say, hey, I'm going to bring you a meal this week. What day works best? And put it that way rather than saying, hey, do you need some help? Because likely they're going to say, we're doing fine.
Right.
Yeah.
It has been a learning curve, because on top of just like our natural disinclination towards asking for help, there's also this like,
we brought it on ourselves.
We brought it on ourselves.
Yeah.
There's like this tension that we're trying to like combat mentally all the time, and we've gotten a lot better about it, and we can see more truth. But there was definitely, especially that first year, where it felt like we did not want to. It was hard for us to like envision letting people in, because we wanted so badly to like to showcase this wild thing that we did, that people were a little bit skeptical. We wanted to show like, see, we knew what we were doing and we made the right decision.
Right.
And so letting on that it was hard and that we were hurting and that there was a lot of like, we felt a lot of brokenness. It felt like, at least for me, I was like, we had people tell us like when we first were kind of getting licensed and stuff, we're keeping an eye on you guys because maybe we might want to do that too, so we're going to be watching. Yeah. And so it's like, you immediately felt like, okay, I got to do this right. Like, because
I can't say how hard it is. Yeah. I mean, we even had like family members that were hesitant to hang out with our younger two because we had been talking about how hard they were. And we were like, maybe we shouldn't have shared that they threw tantrums all day long. now it's like when it comes time to pick up one of the grandkids, it's like, maybe I'll pick up the one who's not so hard. And it's that kind of thing where you go...
Which is natural.
Yeah. And it's like totally understandable. But you're also like, do I share? Do I... And there is a lot of struggle there where you're trying to find that. And, you go on social media and post these pictures of your kids. You're like, we had a great day at the park. And you don't show the fact that, like, that was, like, the only calm moment of the entire thing. And the rest was all, like, chaos and, like, crying and, all that kind of stuff. So it is a balance. And, I think you do have to go, how do I ask for help and find people who can get in the mud with me too. And, no matter if they're family or friends or church people or whatever. So.
Yeah, really well said. Really, I think people can really relate to this aspect of it's hard for a lot of us to ask for help. Giving and receiving grace, the whole thing around pride too, of just like what it means to say, that whole thing of we brought this on ourselves. I mean, you really set the stage well for, I think, what a lot of people do think and wrestle with. But I think, like we've all said, and what we're saying is like we have to lean into help and support. And the last thing I just want to say is we zoom out from the whole larger view here, is that kind of the point of one of the big points of this podcast, foster friendly, and this idea of foster friendly communities and movement is this idea that everyone does have a role and that everything is connected. So when we talk in this episode about sibling separation and the staggering impact of that, that's related to not enough foster families. That's related to foster families not being supported enough and quitting because they don't have the support. So even like when we're stepping in to help foster families in our neighborhoods and our communities, we are impacting keeping siblings together directly or indirectly. And so America's Kids Belong website has an array of resources for exploring fostering, supporting foster families. And, that's part of what you do, Adriana, too, in Georgia, is engaging the community to see their place. So I just want to add that as well.
The Taekwondo gym that he mentioned, is it a gym? Is that what you call it? Studio. They're not foster friendly, which is really cool. And so it's just.
Yeah, so they give like big discounts to foster families to come in there. So stuff like that, exactly what you're talking about. So like, hey, you're not without help and resources and stuff. So.
For sure. Well, thank you guys so much for sharing your story, taking us into the journey, the beautifuls, the hard parts, and just being so real and vulnerable in this, and I think inspiring others too, just with your courage to step in and continue to learn.
Absolutely. We appreciate
Thank you. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If so, will you help us reach more people by subscribing, sharing the podcast with a friend, and leaving a 5-star review? If you've been inspired by what you've heard today and want to learn more of how you can make a difference for kids in foster care and the foster families where you live, visit americaskidsbelong.org. We depend on individual donors to fund our work. We'd be grateful if you would consider joining us as a monthly donor. Visit americaskidsbelong.org to make your tax-deductible donation. Thank you. Together, we can ensure a family for every child in foster care and a foster-friendly community to ensure every foster family feels loved and supported.